Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. This is TeacherFYI, where I share all my teacher tips and budget lifestyle. I'm Mackenzie and I teach 5th grade in Northern California and about to start my 6th year of teaching. Like many of you, I'm going to be starting with distance learning this year. And so in this video, I'm going to be sharing my 10 tips to help you prepare for back to school virtually. So my first tip for you is to build your classroom norms and agreements with your class beginning that very first day. And this is something that I really suggest that you do with your class. Especially if you have older kids, they may already have experience with Zoom or Google Meet from distance learning in the spring, and they may have some really valuable input about their experiences, about what went well, and what they need to really make sure that their online classroom is productive and engaging for them. So some norms that will probably come up in my classroom include being present and engaged and going over with my students about what that looks like, having our mics muted unless it is your turn to speak during a lesson, and making sure our chat box is on topic during our lesson. So my second tip is to set a greeting and a goodbye routine for your students so that they know exactly what to do the moment they enter your online classroom. So for example, when my students enter the classroom, I plan to always have a morning message on the board so that it gets them thinking about what question to answer. They'll also be expected to type here or their name in our chat box so that I can easily go back and take attendance. So on that first day, I do practice and teach my students what a greeting looks like and sounds like. And this is something that I've always done in the classroom, and I feel no different on the online community. So when they come in, I expect a greeting. We usually go over that it involves eye contact unless their cameras are off, and that we use each other's names. I feel also important to go over the routine for the end of the lesson so that students know that's when maybe their questions from the chat box are answered, or that's their time that they can have some social informal chat with their classmates to build relationships with them. And so really being clear with your students about what's expected when they enter the Zoom classroom and when they leave the Zoom classroom, I think is really important to teach, practice, and model for your students. So my third tip is to really teach and practice those Zoom and Google Meet features with your students. There are so many fun ways to make your lessons more engaging for your class, and it's really important that we teach our students how to use those features so that they can use them to be more engaged and have fun without it taking away and getting more distracted with their learning. So some to go over include how to turn your mic off and how to turn it on. How and when are you going to use the chat box? Can they ask questions in it? Are they expected to write complete sentences? Are they using it to take a break? Another would be going over how to use the virtual backgrounds, how to insert their own, or what the expectation is for them. So I think virtual backgrounds are a great way to provide our students with privacy because we are guests in their homes during this time. And I just make sure that my students understand why I let them choose one background for a lesson rather than choosing 5 throughout, where it can become really distracting for them. So again, I really encourage that you teach your students how to use those Zoom features and check in with them to make sure that they feel confident and prepared to use them during a lesson. So my fourth tip for you would be great for primary, but I do plan on using some of these with my 5th graders as well, and that is the use of hand signals. So Zoom has some great reactions for our students, and I do think that it's important to teach our students how and when they can use those reactions because it shows they're engaged even if their video is off. But I also think there's some hand signals that can be really helpful to show students are also engaged. One of those includes the I agree, give a thumbs up, and I also do the repeat for if they need to hear a direction repeated again. So tip number 5 is classroom jobs. So that is one of my favorite parts of my classroom, is giving my students responsibilities and really feeling that everyone has a role that helps our classroom run smoothly. And I really was trying to figure out how I could do this in the online community as well. And I still plan on having a student of the week or a student of the day who is in charge of different parts of our Zoom classroom. So I'm going to have one student in charge of monitoring the chat box, letting me know if there's questions that need to be answered at the end of the lesson. Another student could be in charge of choosing brain breaks for that day. Another student could be in charge of picking our greeting. And of course, some of these jobs won't come into play until a couple weeks into our classroom when we feel a lot more comfortable with using the technology and getting to know each other. Tip number 6 is to make time for some private check-ins with your students. So this could happen even during a lesson. Zoom has a feature where in the chat box you can send a message just to one student. So if I notice that a student is low energy, their behavior seems a little off that day, or maybe their camera is off and usually it's always on, I can send a message to them and just see how they're doing that day. I also plan on giving private feedback to my students, because if I notice that maybe there's a student that hasn't spoken up in a meeting yet and they finally have the confidence to share, I think that's a huge deal. And not everyone wants to have that attention in front of the whole class. And so I think it's important that we send those little positive reinforcements and that feedback to our students, that we're really proud of them, to cheer them on. And that can happen immediately using the chat box. Tip number 7 is to take breaks. We have to keep our students' attention spans and our own attention span in check, because we are not meant to stare at our screen all day. It can be so exhausting, and I think it's really important that we are mindful of our time and that those breaks are really important for our students so that they can be engaged in the learning for that day. So some breaks that I plan on incorporating into my lessons include movement breaks using Go Noodle, also typing in movement GIF or movement GIF. Still don't know the right way to say that. Can be really fun. If you just type it in, there'll be a little icon that you can just slip into your Google Slides, and when you get to that slide, then you have to do that little movement. And also having actual video breaks. Set a timer for 5 minutes or 3 minutes and have your students turn their cameras off, and then they just need to come back by the time the timer runs out. So tip number 8 goes along when you are doing your online presentations. So if you are teaching with any Google Slides or PowerPoint presentations and sharing your screen, I do suggest that you include little icons and visuals for your students so they know exactly what's needed for that lesson. That shows what they are supposed to do on that slide. So if they are supposed to be listening, put a picture of an ear. If they're supposed to be writing notes, put a little picture of a notepad. This just gives them cues on what they should be doing at that point in the lesson. Tip number 9 is to allow wait time. I know when I was doing videos in the spring, it felt like I needed to constantly be talking, and I didn't like how teacher-centered my instruction was. And what I realized is I really wasn't allowing my students enough wait time for them to really process everything and share out their thoughts. So my last tip, tip number 10, is my favorite, and that comes down to relationships and having social time with your students. So this means at the end of lessons, make sure there's times for questions, but also let your students share whatever's on their mind. Get to know one another, have it be really casual and informal. I plan on having lunch bunches with my students, especially those first few weeks, because we do not know each other. And it's going to be very different building that relationship through a computer, but I still think it's possible. When your students know you, they know you care, they're going to start showing up, and they'll be ready to be engaged, ready to have fun, and feel more comfortable in their class when they know their classmates. Maybe at the beginning of the year, include some questions and some sentence starters for them to get that conversation going, but really practicing those social skills is still important, and it helps you get closer with your students, building connections and those relationships that really make our job so worth it. If you found this video helpful, it would really help me out with my new channel if you go ahead and click that like button. And if you want to be notified about any of my future videos, you can go ahead and click the bell and that subscribe button. If you have any questions about any of these tips that I went over or distance learning, go ahead and drop them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to respond back to you. Thanks for watching. Bye everyone.